the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any of the fucking amazeball content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
We're not doctors, not psychologists, and we're certainly not the AP. That's Associated Press for those of you listening at home. We're two non-experts who found ourselves making a little podcast that people happen to like. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So it's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to it, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
After much debate,
Welcome back.
welcome back,
Debate about how much to talk about before we finish.
and just getting back into the interview.
One of the things we'd like to suggest, because we got to listen to this, to give notes for the edit, and we went for a walk in the woods up here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was really, I think it's so perfect. Like I said to him in the interview, I like listening to him on Audible on a walk. Not so much like you can do it anywhere, doing dishes or whatever, like you listen to books and podcasts, but I really enjoyed being out in nature. It was very helpful to do some of the spiritual exercises that he talked about while being present out in the world. So if you want to re-listen to the first one like that or switch it up for part 2, highly recommend.
Dive right back in.
Dive right back in. And
He finishes strong.
I think a lot of the questions that we had going into this in terms of approaching this possibly controversial figure in this space, we asked the questions that we wanted to ask. And I hope that we asked yours also.
We've had more controversial people than
We've
Eckhart
definitely had more
Tolle.
controversial. It's true.
there's-
He's written 2 international bestsellers,
Yeah.
and millions of people credit him with helping them live more present, joyful lives. And we said in episode 1, he's considered one of the most spiritually influential people in the world. Here's our epic chat, part 2, and you can decide what's word salad and what resonates.
And be sure to find us over on Patreon later this week. We're going to keep the tape rolling and process this entire extravaganza. It's going to be a real awakening, or as I like to say,
Consciousness.
All right, let's do it.
Part 2 with Eckhart Tolle. Right now, I'm trying to be present. And also the irony is not lost on me that, one of the reasons I got into our call in the first place was to be more present. and to have more awareness and to not be so anxious, which was for me being in the past
Yes.
and also planning in the future.
Yes.
Never here.
Yes.
Even now I'm like thinking about like
Right.
going in and out. And clearly this is your life's work to help people awaken and be present. Do you see, since we're on a little bit culty, do you see in these toxic spiritual leaders, like how can that tool, the idea of being more conscious, being more present, is there any danger there? Like, does this relate to spiritual bypassing, or do you have any thoughts on where the tool of consciousness can be manipulated?
Well, spiritual bypassing happened a lot, often in the teacher too. Spiritual bypassing means it's a spiritual ego that you believe that you are already beyond certain things like negative emotions and so on, because you have a self-concept of yourself as spiritual. Therefore, you cannot acknowledge that you still carry a lot of negativity, for example, inside you, and you just are not able to be present within, because would create a conflict with your self-image of who you are. And Christians have done it for a long, long time. They love your neighbor as yourself, and they've tried to practice that, not very successfully in most cases.
Still practicing.
Because that in itself is impossible in the normal state of consciousness. You cannot love your neighbor as yourself. Really, the Jesus' statement about the kingdom of heaven that is within you and loving your neighbor as yourself, they really belong together. And what I believe what he was really saying, because all we have is fragments of his teachings, that's what the New Testament is. He was really saying, when you realize the kingdom of heaven that is within you, then you will recognize your neighbor, which means the other person, as yourself. When you recognize who you are in essence, then you can sense the same essence in the other. And that sensing that you share, that consciousness is what you share with the other, you're both aspects of the one consciousness. That recognition is not only empathy with the other, it's also love in a deeper sense, the other. But just to try to love your neighbor as yourself in your normal egoic consciousness is impossible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But you had what was your question?
I'm so present that I completely forgot.
I noticed that. You're just...
I mean, our goal we'd love to give our listeners is understanding what to look for with their leaders, and also how to survive without throwing the baby out with the bathwater once they leave.
Right.
And
the term was, what were we talking about?
we were talking about spiritual bypassing.
How do you know they're just not selling tickets to heaven?
Yeah.
Right.
And also, just like when we hear certain people speaking, using these spiritual terms, it feels like they're glossing over natural human things, and that can be dangerous, right?
Well, there is such a thing as transcendence. You can transcend, let's say you carry a lot of pain from the past in your emotional energy field, which I call the pain body. Let's say you carry that, and if there's enough awareness in you, then you gradually transcend that pain. You go beyond it, and the pain becomes actually transmuted into presence. But spiritual bypassing is fake transcendence.
Yes.
So spiritual bypassing is you convince yourself that you've transcended, but you haven't at all. It doesn't deny the fact that there is the possibility of transcendence, but you haven't done it. And then you have to go there first. You have to sense, you have to take your attention within and not deny what you're experiencing in any given moment. With spiritual teachers, it's important not to confuse. Let's say there's a teacher that delivers inspiring messages or teachings, and you're greatly helped by that. And if you get to know the teacher, you may discover two things. First, outside the teaching situation, no matter where this teacher is at, and I include myself here, on the human level, there is no such thing as perfection. You cannot have a perfect human being who's just totally... I have certain imperfections as a human. Now, we're not talking about extreme dysfunction, which some teachers have, whose egos are overblown.
Right.
So in some teachers, you get extreme egoic dysfunction in their immediate surroundings, in the environment. But some element of imperfection on the human level is always there. Sometimes my place is untidy, or sometimes I don't deal with things in time. I miss deadlines. I'm not perfect on the human level. I don't have severe dysfunction it's relatively harmonious, my environment, but I'm not perfect by any means. I sometimes drink wine and so on. So some people say, oh, no, you can't do that.
Why not?
But it's not to confuse the teaching comes through. And not only teaching, if a teacher has some connectedness with the deeper dimension of presence, then you can also sense that when you're in the presence of the teacher, at least in the teaching situation, you can sense there's a presence that emanates from the teacher. But with other teachers, you can't sense it at all because it doesn't exist. There's only conceptual stuff, only ego, just that. Confusing the human form with that which transcends the human form is often the case when people begin to worship a teacher make the teacher special as the form. They cannot sense. Let's put it in religious terms. Instead of sensing that God is speaking through this teacher in this moment, they confuse God with a form. There was a teacher in India that many people followed.
Is it the moon thing? The finger in the moon?
The finger pointing to the moon. Yes, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. And people often confuse that the finger for the moon or the map is not the territory.
Nancy Salzman used to say that also.
Oh, yeah. Well, you see, I'm sure there was a lot of truth in your organization. Because otherwise you would not have been attracted to it and other people like you're an intelligent person. You're of above average intelligence. There's no doubt about that. and yet there must have been something that was helpful. And then the ego came in.
Right.
I believe you were able to disentangle now that which was helpful, which perhaps it was all secondhand in the case of your teacher.
I do think he actually directly stole from a number of teachers, including you.
Yes.
I figured out what he just did well, I think.
What?
Where most hierarchies have a system that weeds you out because you're not performing. I can say, I can score 50 points a game, but when I go out there and don't do it, I'm weeded out. But with spiritual bypassing, because you can pretend, and it's not always obvious when you're not performing, particularly to your audience, depending on their level of consciousness. Keith outsourced the performance to his curriculum. So it took the responsibility of actually embodying what he says to us, and we weren't there enough to none the wiser. Does that make sense?
And I specifically think he also read Eckhart's book,
for
underlined
sure.
certain passages.
How he did it was that.
Including there's a module he taught called What Is.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd read your books first. So I feel like when I went into next time, I was like, this rings true to me. And it felt right.
Eckhart prepped you?
Eckhart, you prepped me for my cult. You didn't know this. I don't blame you. It's really, I love my life.
Well, the good thing is you can disentangle what was true, or it might have been secondhand. Delivery didn't come from his own deeper realization. It was secondhand, but nevertheless, it was helpful to a limited extent. It was helpful to people. But then it became more and more contaminated with egoic stuff in his case, as is often the case.
To your point, his inner circle got the most shrapnel when the bomb went off.
Yes. And then even the truth can be distorted when the ego comes in. So even the true thing can become distorted. But it's the confusion of the human form of the teacher with the deeper essence that comes through. I remember I met some people who were followers of a teacher in India called Papaji. Papaji, I don't think it was a cult. He was a genuine spiritual teacher, and many people were helped by him. And then as he grew older, his mind was no longer working so well, and he couldn't express himself clearly anymore, and the teaching became a bit muddled. And that a couple of people who told me about this, they were close followers of him. They were thrown into great confusion and suffering because they said, this is not a real teacher. They're so disappointed that after listening to this great teacher, suddenly the teaching became unclear and muddled because he couldn't deliver it. His mind was weakening. He could not deliver the teaching anymore. And they were in a deep crisis, these people who told him about it. They were followers of his. They doubted everything.
Mm-hmm.
The reason, of course, was because they had confused the vehicle
Mm-hmm.
with the essence that the vehicle was the mind, an instrument or vehicle for delivering the teaching and transforming the teaching into words and delivering it and emanating it. They confused that with that which spoke through the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes compare the teacher, I even compare myself often, I'm the window frame. The thing about the window frame is that it lets the light come through. It's a window, the light comes through the window. One matters, not the window frame.
Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that when people see you differently and put you on a pedestal? Or what's your response to that interaction? Is it uncomfortable for you? Or are you used to it by now? Or
Well, I often talk about that not to confuse,
mm-hmm.
even one could say the power that sometimes comes through,
Mm-hmm.
not to confuse that with the person.
Mm-hmm.
The person is no more than a temporary vehicle or an opening for it or a channel for it. And I continuously point it out. But some people do it anyway. They still have this confusion. And in India, it's a custom for when they meet a spiritual teacher, they kiss your feet.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to India, that happened quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And at first very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But then this has been the custom there for thousands of years. India is just different. There's an open spirituality. It's like it's in the air. It's everywhere. I'm not saying that every Indian person is spiritual. There's a lot of materialism there too now. But nevertheless, so I just had to accept it. I don't take it personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I realized it's acknowledging the spirit. Not the form, acknowledging. By the way, I used human being. I often use that expression.
Mm-hmm.
You're a human being. The human is the limited. It is the body and the mind. That's the human you, the personality, the person, and the being is that which transcends that, which is the consciousness. So when they kiss my feet, it's acknowledgement of consciousness, not the human. But it's so easy to succumb to that and let it go to your head and say, I am special. In a way, everybody is special, but the ego always looks for specialness. The ego it compares itself to others, and it wants to be special, more special. It wants to be superior.
Yeah, we like to believe we're better than we really are.
Yes, it's the ego search. It's a continuous search for superiority. Now, every cult leader knows that, because in order to manipulate people, if he's very unconscious or she, he instills this sense of specialness in the followers and sometimes singles out certain followers, especially he wants to have sex with somebody. This person becomes, you are really special. And then he tells them why they're special, because we had many incarnations together and finally we come and whatever.
Past lives.
And the ego feels wonderful with it. I'm so special. I finally arrived. Everything makes sense now. But unfortunately, it was all manipulation. And then at some point, they may wake up to that. But while it was working, this incredible sense of superiority over ordinary humans, and sometimes cults have a sense of everybody who is not a member of this cult is inferior. And some Christian sects also have that belief. They're all wrong except us. And only we are going to be saved. Only our group is going to be saved. Everybody else is lost. Will be lost.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, that's been a few of our episodes. I call it moral supremacy.
Yeah. Now, if the ego cannot be an ordinary, let's not say other than the spiritual ego, which can be enormously strong, an ordinary ego seeks superiority either through your body. If your body is stronger or better looking than other people's body, then you can identify with that. It becomes part of your sense of self, egoic identity. Or it could be your possessions, that you identify with, give you, if you have more and better things than others, that is the ordinary ego, or your achievements, I can do this, but you can't, social status that you identify with as yourself. All this is egoic superiority, seeking something to be superior. And in some cases, people, when they think of ego, they think of people who have big egos, they think they are the greatest. Well, in some cases, that's true. But an ego that believes to be a victim is just as strong as an ego that says, I'm the greatest. And this is particularly these days, a very popular form of ego is victim identity. The more you're a victim, the greater your sense of self. And society recognizes that these days. It becomes a great thing. If you belong to a victim group, you're given special status.
And you leverage your victimhood for power. And,
yes. Not that, of course, some people were victims. Some people were abused as children and so on. So you were victims, or groups of people were victimized. There's no denying that. But to build an identity around that, that's an egoic trap.
That's something that you really actually helped me with. I don't know if you know that, in our conversations in the last 5 years of freedom, and helping me get clear on what my story and message is without being caught in the pain of what actually was. I was victimized, but I don't have to have an identity with that.
Yes.
That was really helpful.
Yes, that's so important. To not to deny it, but it's not who you are.
Right.
It's not, and that's transcendence.
Not to say that I'm enlightened, just to help me be not caught up in that too much.
Yeah. That's transcendence as opposed to bypassing. When you say, I'm so spiritual, I don't feel these things anymore. that's bypassing.
Right. And that is certainly a red flag for us when people say, I'm so spiritual. This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. #cold pools, #crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Well, you can be enlightened at any moment. When you're not identified with your mind, then you're present. And they could say then you're enlightened. The light of presence is there when you're not identified with your mind. And then the ego is not operating. It doesn't mean that 5 minutes from now the ego might return. But at this moment, it's not the ego is not there. It's in abeyance. It's somewhere perhaps waiting to reappear.
For the right moment.
Yeah. Usually when the next challenge comes, the ego comes back.
Kind of like a cold sore. It's just waiting. Good metaphor.
We're just a little brat that wants what it wants, and we haven't tamed it yet.
But just to be present also doesn't depend on time, so you don't need to ask yourself, am I going to be present for the rest of my life? There is no rest of your life because there's only the present moment, because the rest of your life is still a mental construct, because the future does not exist outside of the human mind, because if it did exist outside of the human mind, somebody would have experienced it at some point. If it existed, that doesn't.
Yes.
It's hard to think about this because on a practical level, of course, there is such a thing as future. But on a deeper level, has anybody ever found the future? Have anybody ever experienced it? You can't, because it is a mental thing. The past too. There's only ever this moment. You might remember the past, but only now, in this moment. You might think about the future, because in fact, the future is thought.
Right.
So we need to be able, as humans, we need to be able to handle these concepts, past and future. They are necessary.
Right.
But for our deeper realization of who or what we are, we have to be able to step out of those concepts. After all that is, they're concepts, and realize that all there ever is this moment. And that is an enormous liberation. It's not just a mental thing. Oh, yes, that's true. But when you really realize the truth of it as an experiential realization, then you can actually, this sounds a little strange, you can actually sense what this moment means or is. You can sense the power of this moment. There's a power, the here, that is inseparable from the present moment. We could call it the present moment. This is why I say the power of now. And what is that power that you can sense that is within and without? Brings us back to its consciousness. It's the power of consciousness. It's the present moment. This presence is almost, I wouldn't say tangible, but words are limited. There is an actual presence that is not separate from who you are, but is actually the essence of who you are, is the power of that presence. The Tao, as they call it in ancient China, in the Tao Te Ching, the finest book, one of the great spiritual books. That is the power of the Tao that is everywhere, that flows through everything. To use a term from Christian theology, but it's a helpful one, this power is immanent, which means indwelling, and transcendent. It transcends everything. It comes from another dimension, and yet it indwells in every life form. Everything is a manifestation of that power. To sense the present moment as an actual presence is the same as sensing your own presence. But it's not your own, we just say it. And again, for some people, what I'm saying now is just word salad. But for others, it might be a very helpful pointer. If you can even get a glimpse of what I'm talking about, then it's a very helpful pointer. If you can't get even a glimpse of what I'm talking about, then it's word salad.
No, fair enough. And I think it's what you talk about, the essence or the intent behind the words. So you're using it just to confuse us and drone us, or you're trying to get us a glimpse or as you know it. I was talking with Sarah. I remember that question from our 7-year-old who's turned 8, but he asked me like a month ago. He says, "Dad, is there an us 10 seconds ahead of us and 10 seconds behind us?"
Oh.
And I was like, that's out of my pay grade.
That's a very profound question.
It is,
yeah.
I was like,
How old is
he?
he?
Just
Just
turned
turned
8. And I didn't think he'd outgrow me that quickly.
I remember when I was about that age, or maybe 10 or so, I asked my dad about the universe, and I tried to visualize whether there was an end to it. Is there an end to the... I was always interested in looking at the stars, and is there an end to this universe? And I tried to visualize the end, but if there's an end, what's beyond the end? If it's endless, how can it be endless? It's just not possible. I just couldn't. Even now, nobody can understand
I
this question.
still glitch when I get to the point where I can't answer it.
Yeah. But children often ask very important, very deep questions.
Before he goes to bed, we have questions about the universe time. Sometimes it'll be like, what is hair made of? And we're like, again, you trumped me. So it's like,
Yeah.
I was going to share for our listeners to put their headphones in and to go for a walk. Being out in nature, going to the woods, I find it much easier, at least for me, to actually experience what you're saying in real time with you, but in nature. I find that much easier.
Yes, nature can be very helpful to take you out of the conceptual mind. That's true. Yes, when words are spoken from presence, that state of consciousness that we call presence, there's a certain power to them. That power goes beyond the conceptual value of the words. The conceptual value is fine, but there's more to the words. There's a power that the words carry that can help people to also enter the state of presence when they're open to it. Sounds a little mystical, but that's how it is. So a spiritual teaching, you can have a spiritual teaching that comes only from the mind, from accumulated knowledge in the mind, or a spiritual teaching that arises from a deeper level. It may still incorporate accumulated knowledge, but the deeper essence then speaks through the mind, and it flows through, it uses the mind as an instrument. And that is how a true spiritual teaching operates. And again, if a teacher is in that teaching mode, it's a wonderful thing, can be extremely helpful. And if the teacher is then in his or her private life, who knows how he or she operates, whether that completely loses that presence, in some cases that's so, or whether the teacher is relatively conscious even in private life. I've had some contact with, for example, a very famous spiritual teacher spoke to me not long ago. I had some contact with, I won't even say whether it's him or her. I've had some contact with him or her many years ago. At that time, he or she, I think I might have sent a letter to them, but they didn't reply. Pronoun they. They didn't reply. And not only a couple of years ago, the same person I met again and they said to me, I'm sorry I never replied to your letter that many years ago, but at that time I was quite insane. And at that time, the teacher was already a very powerful speaker and very, very affecting, probably helping many people, but privately, very dysfunctional.
Wow. I'm going through the Rolodex in my head, but I won't guess.
Well, we touched on it a little bit in our last podcast. You know, you have these good orators. You know, one person that's inspired me, Martin Luther King, JFK, when they speak, from my perspective, they speak from maybe the right place.
Yes.
Right now, how they do their personal lives we've all heard all the stories and stuff like that. So, but does that lessen the power of their capacity to step into that role?
Yes.
And influence people, you know, that I still watch those speeches today and get goosebumps.
Yes, that's right.
So you don't want to throw it all away. There's a lot of good that's coming there that's lifting people up. So it's a hard.
And again, that's an interesting point with speakers. There are some speakers, even spiritual speakers, that I've seen, some, when they get on stage and start speaking, they deliver a performance.
Yes.
They become the speaker. It becomes, and it could be quite powerful as a performance, but it lacks a deeper essence.
Heart.
Yeah, sometimes it works on an emotional level and so on. Yeah, and then there are other speakers who do not perform when they speak. In fact, there's no change in how they are normally. And when they speak, so there's a more natural way of speaking. I don't believe I don't really shift from when I speak on stage or when I speak here or wherever. It's just
you. Hey there. Hope you're enjoying this a little bit culty episode. If you're interested in more long-form culty content, check out my memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped Nexium, the cult that bound my life.
You can get it on Amazon or listen to it on Audible or find it at most bookstores in the, quote, total badass woman in nonfiction section, which is new.
Thanks, babe. I appreciate you. And now here's a message from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Given these speakers and this space that we've been talking about, what chaps your ass, Eckhart?
Oh, really?
What's your? And then we were laughing earlier, like nothing chaps your ass because you don't get reactive. But is there anything that you would, when you look out into the space, that you kind of roll your eyes at a little bit, or that you think is noteworthy to acknowledge in this way?
Eye roll, yes, I must admit that sometimes happens.
This is the Eckhart version. What makes you roll your eyes, Eckhart?
When I listen to certain things on that have kind of become mainstream, some extreme aspects of wokeness that these days with totally irrational beliefs and just the most absurd things. I don't want to go into detail because we may lose some of the viewers who have already listeners who have already been infected by the wokeness. Some of it is become. Many of the things started as good things,
Right.
but a good thing, when you take it further and further and further, becomes a bad thing. Not long ago, I read about a woman who learned about how good water is to cleanse your body. So she started to drink water, and then she thought, well, if 2 bottles are good, then 3 must be even better. And then she drank more and more water, and finally she killed herself with water. Something that is good in moderation, when you take it to an extreme, it acquires a certain momentum, and it grows and it grows. It was good when it started. For a while it was good, and then it became excessive. And then it became bad.
And it flames
the very
out.
same thing became bad. The ancient Greeks had a famous saying, nothing in excess, because anything, no matter how good it is, you take it to an extreme, it actually turns into its opposite. Right. So that's the case. So the eye rolls can happen quite often when
What do you want? What do you want the world to know?
Well, that there is a purpose to your life, to everybody's life. There is a purpose, and that's, of course, this is very important because many people live without any sense of purpose. There's nihilism is very prevalent these days. Nothing makes much sense. Everything is pointless, and there's a purpose to human life. Purpose, on the one hand, is you can have a personal purpose, and that's fine. It's a good thing to have a personal. Maybe it's your career or whatever it is, or you want to have lots of children or whatever, or you want to be good at something, some activity, some job, or playing an instrument. personal purpose can be many kinds of personal purpose. It's a great thing to have a personal purpose in your life, but sometimes it's not enough if the personal purpose is not aligned with the greater purpose, human purpose, then it's always quite limited and ultimately will not be satisfying. And the greater purpose is the growth of consciousness, to become a more conscious human being. So to realize that whatever you do on your personal level, the most important question is it aligned with the greater purpose? The greater purpose is the awakening of human consciousness. And we talked earlier about what that means, what awakening is. So the greater purpose is the awakening. And if you have a personal purpose, align it with the awakening of consciousness. In other words, so whatever you do on a personal level, do it as consciously as possible. Place attention into it. Give it attention. Do it carefully and consciously, rather than trying to get it out of the way in order to get to the next thing. And then when you get to the next thing, try to get that out of the way to the next. This is how many people live, always for the next thing, never fully acknowledging this thing. So to do everything consciously, that would be aligning your personal purpose with universal purpose, which is the awakening of human consciousness. So the message is that there is a greater purpose to life, even if you might have failed in your personal purpose. Maybe things have gone wrong, but they often do in many people's lives. And almost everything at some point will go wrong. So maybe many things have gone wrong. But the question is, if they've gone wrong, and if that suffering that you went through has taken you to this point where you begin to realize that there is more to your life than your personal purpose. There is a transcendent purpose, which is the awakening of consciousness, which can happen at this moment. Become conscious of this moment, at this moment, as yourself. That's the awakening of consciousness. This can happen even if your whole life was a total mistake. Some people make one mistake after another, or one bad decision after another. And I've had letters from people from prison who were in prison, some for life, and they said, I read your book and I have become free internally. I feel free now. All their suffering is taken to this point of awakening to the deeper essence of who they are. The message is awakening, the possibility of awakening, and for many humans, anybody who recognizes this message is already beginning to awaken. The fact that you recognize what I'm talking about means you're already awakening. Right. And if you don't recognize it, you're not awakening yet, and it's just word salad.
But they don't need to join a cult to have an awakening.
No,
right?
No, you don't. In fact, it would be better not to join a cult.
Just a little side note.
That's a good soundbite. Eckhart says it would be better not to join a cult.
I think we know someone in prison that he could send that book to.
We do.
Yeah,
we should send them. Oh, well, he's already read it because that's where he stole from.
Yeah, I guess you already knew that. Never mind.
As you can see, laughter is a part of our healing.
Yeah.
Lucky to have a partner.
It's not all me, Sarah.
Oh, yeah.
My ego won't allow that.
Oh, really?
Well, the awakening of consciousness has always been important, but it's more important now because humanity is arriving at a critical stage in many respects. It's a time of crisis, and we haven't even seen the end of it yet. We're just moving into very turbulent times. That's my feeling. We are moving into very turbulent times, but that's also the great opportunity for spiritual awakening. In fact, humans don't awaken, and when they're in their comfort zone, they don't awaken. They have to be taken out of their comfort zone, and then there's a possibility of awakening. And now many more humans will be taken out of their comfort zone. And it's already been happening on many levels, and that's a good thing. From an ordinary perspective, bad things are happening. Right. From a higher perspective, the bad things that are bad on this normal level, I'm not denying the badness of bad things, but there are levels of truth. And what is true on one level may not be true on a higher level. All the bad things that are happening are actually part of the evolution of human consciousness.
This is the process.
Yeah.
I think that's an important concept, and I also know that that's one of the tenets of spirituality that I feel can be abused by a toxic leader to say that this bad thing is,
Yes.
oh, this abuser is actually your master teacher.
Yes.
That concept
Yes.
can be really
Yes.
like a gaslighting.
Yes, yes. Many of these things can be misused by the ego. The ego can misuse many spiritual truths. The ego has, to a large extent, misused the teachings of Jesus, too. It's quite a profound teaching. But when the ego gets hold of it, it distorts it and misuses it. So let's say in the Middle Ages, you had the Inquisition, when people were burned at the stake, and in the name of Christian and of Christianity. That happens when the ego gets hold of it and totally distorts everything.
Right.
Yes.
You touched on a point. Like a lot of the people that I follow in certain fields like finance and, other fields, they all collectively say that this is going to be a rough time.
Yes.
Do you think that in some respects saying that it's a rough time or whatever causes it to happen? And then how does that affect the consciousness of what's going on?
Well, I think if you see, let's say you're out in the country and you see on the horizon dark clouds coming in and approaching, again, it would be spiritual bypassing to say, well, it's not really happening. The rain is not coming, the thunderstorm and the storm is not coming this way, but it is coming this way.
Right.
So when you recognize something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are manifesting it. But there's an important thing to add to this. Even in the midst of turmoil, you can be in a state of peace. So you manifest peace even around you. We don't know where life will take you or anybody as the turmoil increases in this world. But you can be in a state of peace even in the midst of turmoil. And you will make a difference too. So if enough people are conscious, even as the turbulence approaches, then if there's a sufficient number of humans who are conscious, then probably the turbulence will pass more quickly. If not sufficient number of humans are conscious, then it could linger for much longer, and we could move into a so-called dark age. That's possible too. There's nothing wrong with that. We've already had many dark ages after the Roman Empire collapsed. There were many centuries, almost 1,000 years, well, depending on how you look at it. But certainly many hundreds of years of diminished culture, and most humans lost the ability to read and write. They couldn't build structures anymore. Many abilities were lost. Culture was the culture that we had in antiquity, ancient Greece and ancient Rome came to an end. But even within the Dark Ages, so-called Middle Ages, there were humans that were actually quite awake. They were mostly in the West. They were Christians, mystics, enlightened teachers, mystical Christianity. So the Dark Age, if it happens, that is part of what needs to happen. But you can be conscious, even during a Dark Age, there were conscious people. I'm very optimistic about human destiny and the so-called future, which ultimately doesn't exist. Short term, I'm not so optimistic. But long term, I know that consciousness is evolving and humans will almost certainly make it. Not 100% guarantee. And if humans don't make it, it doesn't matter that much either, because consciousness can take on many forms and can express itself, manifest itself through countless life forms, but it's always the one consciousness. So the essence of who you are will always be present, no matter what happens.
Remarkable for me this last hour and a half, but especially that we're in 5 years of freedom from our group, and to have known you this whole time and to have been the lucky recipient to have received a great deal of healing and peace because of your teachings and your kindness and your generosity. Even though this podcast is called a little bit culty, I feel you're the real deal. And your wisdom, which I think is what so many of us are looking for when we join cults or groups. No one joins a cult on purpose. We join a community, we join a organization, all these things. But to find someone who truly is an embodiment and also so humble and down to earth at the same time is a gift. So I feel very lucky to have been on this journey and to have literally bumped into you on the street 5 years ago.
Lucky for both of us.
Yeah.
Thank you for your consciousness.
Well, thank you. It's not mine, it's yours too.
Thank you.
Part 2, over. That was a career
That was
highlight for
fun.
me.
That was fun.
And the first one we've ever done in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is,
What?
I don't know.
You were so
No.
present. It was hard to
That's what happens.
You were just experiencing
That's what
yourself
happens. I was experiencing you,
and
too,
your
Sarah.
true essence.
There you go.
Listen, I'm constantly trying to stay present. In fact, we listened to this and then we took a break to go to yoga the other day and I got onto my mat and
You found your center?
I found my center.
Yeah.
You know, often they say, what's your intention? And my intention was like, I'm just going to stay present and stay on my mat. And then I thought, you know how many times I've said that, like tried to stay present? I've never once gotten through a full yoga class without popping into my, to-do list and, replaying
Telling me that I'm doing it wrong.
leaning over and telling Debbie he's doing wrong, which I would never do.
She's like, try getting your hips. I'm like, listen, the whole reason I'm here is because of my hips.
Anyway, like 5 minutes later, I realized I'm not present anymore, and I've like completely gone somewhere else on the thought train in my head. And then I was thinking of all the things that he talked about and the overlap between the teachings and the technology and XDM. I think we should discuss that over at Patreon. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Come and join us there. And if you're not feeling awakened, you're doing it wrong. No, that's gaslighting. If you're not feeling awakened, hey, look, this might not be for you. Also gaslighting.
Yeah. Well,
If you're not feeling awakened, who cares? Just live your life. Be happy. But just kidding. Listen, we're not awakened. Our pain bodies hurt
daily.
if you yell at us for making that joke. We're just, we're trying to make light of this whole thing. Don't take it so seriously. We just want y'all to be happy. But do let us know what you think on Instagram or
leave us a voicemail, which I think I've stated as my preference.
but we do want to hear it.
It's on our website,
on our website.
littlebitculty.com. But just remember, if it's really good, we might have to play it.
And we will. And we're cranking out that bonus content, some special treats. And you are special. You are a special person. You are a special
what's
community.
going on here?
We are
Let's
the
just-
most special.
just-
A Little Bit Culty has the best, most special listeners.
Jesus.
Extraordinary.
Right.
Fuck all that ego stuff. You're magnificent.
I want you to use words like neat. It's really
You're
neat.
magnificent. Also, reminder, we're on Donor Box. If you don't want any of the bonus content and you don't like polite bribes or promotional mugs, but you do want to support the show, keep the Donor Box contributions
Much
coming.
appreciated. Thank you all. It
Yeah.
helped us.
Thank you for helping make this little cult podcast and for listening with open minds and open heart chakras. Namaste.
Really?
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.
What is your pre-show ritual?
I mean, yeah, occasionally I'll probably have a on stage. It loosens you up, doesn't it? What?
I'm sorry, Josie, I didn't expect you to be f***ing honest.
Oh, sorry, fair. I'm always honest.
Moving right along
Anyway,
again.
sorry. You know what I mean? Gets you loose, doesn't it?
You know what your dad does? He prays.
Does he? Mm-hmm. Does he pray? Fair. I love that. Cool.
Billboard chart-topping singer and songwriter Youngblood joins the Osbournes podcast, dropping August 13th. Listen now wherever you get podcasts.